The road was narrow and winding, lost between towering trees that hadn't been cut back in years. The kind of road that makes you forget you're in the present. The narrator's car moved slowly over it, tires crunching against gravel and dry pine needles, each mile dragging them further away from the world they knew and deeper into the stillness of forgotten land. They hadn't been here before. The house, passed down through bloodlines they barely remembered, had always been a ghost in family conversations. Something inherited, but never spoken of directly. A childhood warning disguised as a joke. One day you'll own that place, and good luck sleeping with all its secrets. It had taken weeks to track down the keys. The solicitor was evasive, almost relieved when the transfer was completed. No one asked why the house had been empty for so long. It was simply described as unwanted. But when the last signature was signed and the last envelope sealed, the house became theirs. And now here it stood. The car stopped just in front of a rusting wrought iron gate, barely held upright by old hinges and thick vines. The entrance path was more overgrown trail than driveway, paved once perhaps but now swallowed by time. Weeds choked the stone, and small, unidentifiable flowers bloomed in strange clusters around the perimeter like offerings. The house loomed behind the trees, tall, wooden, unpainted for decades, its boards grayed by sun and rain, its windows fogged with grime and time. The roof sagged in places, and the second-floor balcony was missing part of its railing. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't even look haunted. It looked tired, like it had waited far too long for someone to return, and now it wasn't sure how to welcome them. Unlocking the front door took effort. The key stuck. The wood had swollen, but eventually it gave way with a dull click. The door creaked open slowly, resisting as if reluctant to disturb the silence inside. Dust filled the air in a slow, drifting fog. The smell was heavy, mold, old wood, dry paper, and something else. The scent of stillness itself. Not rot, not decay, but the aroma of long empty space. The entrance hallway was choked in shadows. Sunlight filtered weakly through stained and cracked windows, casting warped colors on the wooden floor. Everything inside was still, untouched and forgotten. A coat rack still stood by the door, holding a single tattered scarf. A hallway table supported a brass lamp, unplugged and lifeless. And beyond it, the room stretched into a cold stillness, like the house had exhaled one long breath and then stopped breathing entirely. The floorboards complained beneath every step, groaning in slow protest as the narrator explored room by room. The living room held a fireplace whose grate was coated in soot. A pile of logs sat beside it, but the dust on them was thick and undisturbed. Above the fireplace, a portrait hung crookedly, its subject long faded, only a pale face remaining among shadows. They found the kitchen next, its appliances rusted and useless. Cabinet doors hung open, as though someone had left in a hurry. A ceramic plate still sat in the drying rack by the sink, cracked clean down the center. Upstairs, the hallway was lined with closed doors. Some handles turned with ease. Others were stuck fast, warped with age. One room was a nursery, untouched except for a rocking horse facing the window. Another was a study, its shelves filled with books swollen from moisture. And then, there was the room they would sleep in. It wasn't the largest nor the cleanest, but something about it felt less oppressive. A window overlooked the overgrown garden. The bed frame was iron, sturdy. The mattress was intact, albeit stiff. They stripped off the old bedsheets and replaced them with ones they had brought. New, clean, untouched by time. Still, the scent of the room lingered, like lavender, long dead. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in bruised blues and smoky grays, the house seemed to retreat deeper into itself. Each room darkened faster than it should. Each corner folded into shadow. The wind picked up, whispering through the gaps in the windows like a language no longer spoken. With no electricity, the narrator lit 2 oil lamps. The flame flickered gently, casting long shadows that moved like memories across the walls. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the house settle, or perhaps listening to something else. Somewhere above, a shingle rattled in the breeze. From below, the floor seemed to flex, just slightly. Not enough to alarm, just enough to be noticed. They dismissed it. As an old house, they reminded themselves. Old houses have their own language. They creak and shift. They speak in wood and wind and gravity. And yet, as they lay down that night, clothed in warm blankets, a soft lamp still flickering nearby, the air seemed heavier, as if the house had inhaled deeply, holding its breath. And then, as the minutes stretched into hours, from directly beneath the floorboards, came the sound. Tap, 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 delicate, rhythmic, almost thoughtful, not loud, not threatening, not even strange, just present. They told themselves it was nothing. A pipe, a squirrel, a trick of old timber. But as the sound continued, spaced out, deliberate, they realized something unsettling. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It wasn't mechanical. It was intentional. And somewhere deep beneath them, in the hollow silence under the floor, something was there. Not angry, not urgent, just waiting. Sleep did not come easily. Even with the body tired from travel and the weight of silence pressing gently on their mind, the narrator lay still, eyes open, watching the shadows twist across the ceiling. The oil lamp, dimmed to its lowest flame, swayed slightly from the draft crawling beneath the door. The floor beneath the bed felt unnaturally warm. Not hot, just a few degrees above the room. Enough to notice. Enough to wonder. The tapping had stopped, but it had left something behind. Presence. Like the faint smell of smoke after a candle has been blown out. Around 2:47 a.m., though the narrator only realized this later, the sound returned. But this time it wasn't tapping. It was whispering. Soft. Indistinct. Just on the edge of hearing. The kind of whisper you don't hear with your ears, but with something deeper, more internal. It curled around the edges of the silence like a fog crawling along the ground. The narrator held their breath. The whispering wasn't threatening. It didn't hiss or demand. It wasn't in a language they recognized. It simply murmured, like someone talking to themselves in another room, unaware they could be heard. Came from beneath the bed. From under the floorboards. The narrator sat up slowly, placing bare feet on the cold floor. The boards groaned slightly, but the whisper didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to acknowledge the movement. Not with louder volume, but with a slight tonal shift, like a change in cadence. A different rhythm. The whisper, it seemed, was not random. It was responsive. They crouched down and pressed an ear to the wooden floor. The cold seeped into their skin. And then, clear as breath in winter, a single sound emerged. Mm. A low hum. A lullaby without lyrics. Long. Drawn out. Sad. The narrator jerked back. They stared at the floor in disbelief. Every nerve told them to leave, to get up, pack their things, and go back to their car. But the voice hadn't been angry. It hadn't been dangerous. It had been lonely. Eventually, they fell into an uneasy sleep, the soft humming continuing beneath them like a cradle-rocking rhythm. When they woke at dawn, the room was cold, the lamp burned out, and the floor was silent. But the warmth was still there, radiating gently from beneath the bed. Morning brought gray skies and a gentle mist. The house looked no less tired in daylight, only less shadowed. The narrator brewed instant coffee over a portable burner, the steam rising in front of cracked windows like the breath of something large and sleeping. They began to explore in earnest. The rooms upstairs were faded and worn. A sewing room with rusted scissors left on a windowsill. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and a mirror too fogged to reflect. In the back hallway, a door led to an attic. The lock was broken. The space above was empty except for a few boxes and a child's stuffed rabbit, its ear torn. But it was the basement they were most curious about. They found the door tucked behind the kitchen, almost hidden behind a sliding shelf unit. The handle was cold and rusted. When they pulled it open, the The stairwell beyond was swallowed in blackness. No light reached the bottom. They flicked on a flashlight, but the bulb only pushed back the dark a few feet. The air that rose from the stairwell was damp and metallic, like iron and earth. But something else caught their attention. A sound. Or rather, the absence of one. The entire house seemed to breathe, subtly creaking and shifting with the wind. But at the top of the basement stairs, all of that stopped. There was no creak, no whisper, no wind. The silence was absolute. They closed the basement door without going down. Back in the living room, they found an unusual feature. A floorboard near the fireplace that looked newer than the rest. It wasn't polished or replaced. Just wrong. Warped slightly. Split at one end. Unlike the other planks, it bowed outward, as if something below had been pushing gently against it for years. When they touched it, the wood was warm. They pressed down, but it didn't budge. Not loose. Not ready to lift. Just waiting. That night, they didn't eat. Appetite was gone. The house was no longer just a space. It was a presence. The second night was colder. The narrator lit 3 lamps instead of 1. Shadows stretched across the walls in long, reaching shapes. The floor groaned beneath their footsteps, louder than before. They lay on the bed, fully dressed, listening. First silence. Then, just after 2:40 a.m., a familiar presence stirred below. The whispering began again, more distinct than the night before. Louder but still soft, like someone whispering through cupped hands. They could make out tone, not words, intonations of sorrow, of longing. And then came the humming. A slow, lullaby-like sound, like an old tune sung by a child left alone for too long. The melody was fractured, unfinished. It repeated a few bars before falling into silence, only to begin again. The narrator sat up. This time they whispered back. "Hello!" Nothing changed. They moved to the floor, pressing an ear to the wood. The warmth was stronger now, almost comforting. Then, a soft, breathy reply rose through the floorboards. Not a word, but a sigh. A long, tired sigh. The kind one gives after waiting a very long time. They spent the next morning examining the warped plank in the living room. It was clearly different. Bowed at the edges, cracked in the center like heat had warped it from below. It gave a little under pressure, not quite loose, but not secure either. The narrator fetched a screwdriver and gently pried at the edges. But the board resisted. It wasn't nailed in, it was rooted. As if the wood itself didn't want to be removed. They gave up, but not before noticing something else. Where the crack split the wood, something was wedged inside. Thin. Like cloth. Or hair. They didn't pull it free. Not yet. Later, as they sat near the board, the hum returned. In daylight it was fainter. Just a note. A tone beneath the house. Like a musical instrument buried under soil. That night they dreamed of someone knocking slowly on the underside of the world. The third night arrived without ceremony. The sky was starless, wrapped in thick cloud, and the house seemed to lean further into its own silence. The narrator lit the same 2 oil lamps as before. Their light now seemed dimmer, more hesitant. They placed one on the nightstand and the other on the floor near the warped board, as if the flame could guard them against whatever lay beneath. Sleep came easier this time, not because the whispers were gone, but because they had become expected. There was a strange comfort to the nightly pattern. The hum, the sigh, the gentle presence in the floor felt less like being haunted and more like being accompanied. And yet, when the narrator woke, something was off. The lamp on the floor had been tipped over. The flame was out, and they were no longer in the bed. They were lying flat on the wooden floor, face down, directly over the cracked board. Their cheek pressed against the warm wood. One hand rested on the splintered edge. The air was thick, humid, and the scent of old earth filled their nose. Wet soil, rotted wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender left too long in a drawer. They sat up slowly, confused. Their last memory had been of laying under the blanket, eyes closed, listening to the faint hum. But now their blanket was still neatly folded on the bed, the pillows undisturbed. It was as if they had never climbed into the bed at all. Only one thing was certain: they hadn't walked here awake. The narrator's limbs felt heavy, as though they had moved in a dream. They checked their feet, dusty, dirty. The soles of their socks were blackened with ash and age. The fireplace was cold. The room was silent. But the warmth under the board had intensified, as if whatever lay beneath had been closer during the night. That morning, as they sipped cold coffee and stared at the warped floorboard, a single question formed in their mind: not what is under there, but why did it want me so near? That night, the house felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just expectant. As if it was waiting. The narrator didn't go to bed. Instead, they sat cross-legged on the floor, inches from the cracked board, with the lamp beside them casting flickering shadows across the walls. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just listened. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. No tapping. No humming. Just the sound of their own breath and the wind dragging softly against the windows outside. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the floor warmed, and a whisper rose, not fragmented, not broken, but whole. "Are you still here?" The words came slowly, syllable by syllable, barely audible above the silence. A woman's voice, thin, fragile, like someone who hadn't spoken aloud in a very long time. The narrator froze. Their mouth went dry. Their eyes stung. They waited. The voice continued. "You're not her, but you're kind." The narrator leaned closer, trembling slightly. They whispered back, "Who are you?" The floor was quiet for a moment. Then, the soft sigh returned. "It's been so long." The boards vibrated slightly beneath their fingers. Not shaking, not threatening, just pulsing, like a heartbeat under layers of wood. The narrator sat there until morning, the lamp burning low, listening to the silence beneath the floor, and feeling less alone than they had in years. Later that day, while cleaning a hallway closet, the narrator discovered something peculiar. A tall, dust-covered mirror, draped in a pale sheet. They pulled the cloth away and revealed the glass beneath. Tarnished, cloudy, but intact. They moved it into the living room near the fireplace, thinking it might make the place feel less empty. But that night, as they passed by the mirror on the way to the kitchen, something caught their eye. Not their own reflection, but someone else's. In the mirror, crouched just below their feet, was a pale face, eyes wide, unblinking, peering up from beneath the floorboards. Her expression wasn't hostile. She looked tired. Thin strands of hair clung to her face. She wore a nightgown that shimmered faintly, even in shadow. The narrator spun around. Nothing there. The floor was closed. Silent. Still. They turned back to the mirror. Just their own reflection now, wide-eyed, trembling, unsure. For the rest of the night, they avoided the mirror. But the image lingered in their thoughts, etched behind their eyes. That face, so calm, so sad, so silently watching. She hadn't seemed surprised to be seen. The next morning, driven by a sudden need for answers, the narrator returned to the attic. They rummaged through boxes they had ignored before. Old clothing, cracked photo frames, brittle paper. One box was different. Inside, wrapped in a floral scarf, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was brittle, the spine nearly crumbling. The first few pages were blank, but deeper inside were shaky pencil markings. The handwriting was childlike, uneven. The entries were dated, but the years were nearly 50 years old. Mother said, "I'm not allowed to make noise when the guests are here. I like to hum because it keeps me from crying. I sleep under the floor now. She says the space makes me safe. I miss the sky. I told myself a story tonight. It was about a girl who could sing stars into the ceiling. I'm so lonely." The entries ended abruptly. The name signed at the bottom of the last page was a single initial E. The narrator ran their fingers over the fading paper, heart pounding. The journal smelled faintly of lavender and dust. And just for a moment, the narrator could swear they felt breath on the back of their neck. A whisper. "You found me." The rain arrived just before dusk. No warning. No distant thunder. Just a sudden whine through the trees, a shift in air pressure, and then, like a sky cracking open, sheets of water hammering the roof. The house groaned under the weight of it, the windows trembling in their frames. Outside, trees danced and twisted, and the wind carried distant howls from the woods. Inside, the narrator sat still by the fireplace, the journal open in their lap, rereading the entries for the third time. Their eyes lingered on the final page, trying to make sense of the broken thoughts. The girl, Ida, had been trapped, silenced, and possibly buried beneath the very boards on which they now sat. As lightning forked across the sky, the entire room flickered, and the hum began. But this time it wasn't soft. It wasn't background. It was a song. Still wordless, still slow but powerful. Rich, full of longing. The melody curled through the walls like vines in a forgotten cathedral. The floor beneath the narrator's hands was vibrating, gently but unmistakably, each hum pulsing like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. They stood up and fetched the small audio recorder from their travel bag. Holding it near the floor, they pressed record. The voice continued, never rising above a whisper, but weaving into the storm outside. Wind and water and song, all blending into one long, sorrowful lullaby. Then, the song changed. The tones rose, mournful and trembling. The rhythm shifted into something more complex, less a lullaby and more a cry. Not in pain, not in fear, but in need. A desperate reaching for acknowledgement. And then, layered beneath the melody, they heard words. Not spoken, but breathed, barely there. "Please, don't go." Lightning flashed again. In the mirror, just for an instant, the girl was visible again. Kneeling beneath the floor, her palms pressed to the underside of the planks, her mouth moving in time with the whisper. Then she was gone. And the room was silent again, save for the recorder's blinking red light. The following night, the narrator didn't wait. They set up a lamp, the recorder, and placed the journal nearby. This time, they spoke first. "Are you still there?" The hum answered almost immediately, soft as breath. "I am," the whisper said. "You didn't leave?" The narrator exhaled, unsure if they were afraid or relieved. They didn't respond at first. Instead, they knelt down and placed both palms on the cracked board. The wood was warm, pulsing like something alive, something aware. The voice beneath spoke again. "You hear me now?" "Yes," they whispered. "You're not like the others." "What others?" they asked. Silence for a moment. Then, "They came once. Long ago. They heard me and sealed the door." "The basement?" the narrator asked. "Too deep. Too dark. They were afraid." Another pause. "But you listen." The narrator felt something rise in their chest. Sympathy. A strange kind of closeness. The girl beneath the floorboards wasn't a monster. She wasn't angry. She was a memory that refused to fade. A song still trying to be heard. They whispered softly, "What's your name?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, the humming returned, slower this time. Lulling. Tender. The narrator stayed on the floor all night, head resting on folded arms, listening to the sound of someone who had forgotten how to sleep alone. That night, the dreams were vivid. Not frightening. Not grotesque. But deeply, hauntingly sad. They dreamt of a small girl crawling through a narrow wooden tunnel, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Her hands were covered in splinters. Her knees scraped raw. But she moved with purpose. She whispered stories to herself, broken fairy tales, scattered rhymes, as if trying to drown out something in the silence. The dream shifted. Now the girl was curled in a hollow beneath the house, her arms around her legs, rocking gently. Above her, faint footsteps. She looked up through the floorboards, mouth opening to sing, but no sound came out. Then, in the dream, the narrator was her. They felt the weight of the floor above, the darkness pressing in, the echo of voices fading behind walls, time melting into years, and the unbearable knowledge that no one was coming. When they woke, the room was cold. The lamps were out. The wind had stopped, but the warmth under the floor was stronger than ever, almost like an embrace. The days passed without measure. The narrator no longer checked their phone. The world outside the house faded into unreality. Time bent around the old wooden walls. They no longer slept in the bed. They made a nest of blankets near the cracked board and lay beside it each night, whispering stories into the floor. The girl responded in fragments. Sometimes just hums. Sometimes full words. "You're kind? You see me? I like your voice." Each phrase was slower, less spectral, more human. It felt less like speaking to a ghost, and more like speaking to someone trapped in time. One night, the whisper asked, "Will you stay?" The question hung heavy in the air. The narrator didn't answer. Not because they didn't know, but because they did. They no longer feared the house. Felt like home. The sadness in the walls had seeped into them, and now, something deep inside was afraid to leave. Afraid to abandon the only voice that had ever truly sounded like it needed them. That evening they made a choice. They returned to the fireplace and retrieved the screwdriver from days before. Kneeling before the warped board, they whispered, "I'm here." Then slowly they pried the floor open. The plank gave way with a long, aching creak. Beneath it, darkness. A narrow, dust-filled crawlspace stretched beneath the house, barely tall enough to fit a body. But the moment the air touched their face, a warm breeze rose up. Not cold, not musty warm. Like breath. The voice whispered, "I knew you would come." They shined a flashlight into the space but saw nothing. Just the faintest outline of a hollow space that seemed to stretch further than it should. They lowered themselves to the floor, one hand reaching into the void. And something warm and small brushed their fingertips. They lay there now, not fully inside the floor but not quite outside it either. Half covered in blankets, one arm resting in the open space, fingers laced with the unseen hand below. The humming is constant now, steady, slow, and beautiful. The voice no longer speaks in fragments. "Now we both sleep," it says. "Now you don't have to leave. Now I'm not alone." The house no longer creaks. The mirror no longer reflects anything at all. The clock on the mantel is still stopped at 2:47, and the lamp has gone out. But the hum continues, soft and slow. Under the floorboards, something whispers still. It is not angry. It is not forgotten. It is simply not alone anymore.